What the?
We're not quite done exploring Windows-based hardware, and this time around we return to AMD's Ryzen 7 7840U, which is quite the familiar chipset on the channel, being featured in a few handhelds last year. However, this 7840U takes on a new form, and for the first time on the channel, we will be exploring the 7840U in a very, and I mean very, mini PC. The EM780 from Minisforum is a 1/4 liter desktop PC that features AMD's very capable 7840U, and I'm very excited to explore the possibilities of not only a mini PC that fits in the palm of your hands, but also check out the 7840U without the constraints that comes with portability. Please join me, Rob the Retro Tech Dad, as we explore one of Minisforum's latest offerings and check out its gaming capabilities to find out if tiny can be mighty. Of course, we can't talk about the EM780 without getting familiar with the specs of this tiny PC. The EM780 is equipped with AMD's very popular Ryzen 7 7840U, which features 8 cores and 16 threads and has a boost up to 5.1 GHz. It features the Radeon 780M integrated graphics, with 32GB of LPDDR5 dual-channel RAM at 6400 MHz. My specific unit includes 1TB of internal M.2 2022-30 PCI Express 4.0 SSD with an option for 512GB. There is an available microSD slot for storage expansion. We have onboard Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.3. There are 2 USB 4.0 ports with video and power delivery support, 3 USB-A 3.2 Gen 2 ports, an HDMI 2.1 for video out up to 4K at 60Hz, and a 3.5mm audio jack. It includes a 65W GAN Type-C power delivery adapter in the box, and ships with Windows 11. The EM780 starts at $619 for the 32GB and 512GB configuration, or $639 for the 32GB and 1TB configuration. I'd like to thank Minisforum for providing this unit for the purpose of this review. As I always require, Minisforum did not review this video prior to publishing. So let's go ahead and unbox this very small package and check out what's included here. The EM780 is part of the Mercury series from Minisforum, and they do actually have a 6800U version of this PC, the EM680. On the back of the box, we have the specs detailed of this specific unit, which is the 32GB RAM and 1TB of storage configuration. Let's pull back the flap and get this opened up. It looks like we have a few inserts that greet us upon opening the package. The first insert looks to be a tip sheet explaining possible causes of a slow boot. The next insert warns users to not remove the CPU cooler since the EM780 does use liquid metal for cooling and could possibly impact its performance. Finally, we have the usual user manual, which details things like the specifications of the unit. We finally get our first peek at this tiny PC, but I will put it aside for a moment and check for additional contents in the package. At the bottom of the box below the insert for the EM780, we have a USB Type-C to Type-C cable. It's a bit shorter length that I'd like to see for a unit that does need to be plugged in permanently, as not everyone may have a power outlet nearby. Additionally, we have an included HDMI cable, which the EM780 does support HDMI 2.1 output. Finally, we have the included 65W GAN power supply, and I do like the texturing on the side of this power block. Let's now get back to the main attraction, and can I just say I am blown away by how absolutely tiny this little PC is. I'm gonna try sizing it up in just a little bit to give everyone a better idea of the size here, but yeah, this is pretty amazing. Okay, time to gently unseal the plastic baggie and get this tiny PC out of here. I really like the design of this unit, the very subtle Minisforum logo in the corner there with the pretty slick looking grille at the top. And this is probably the perfect time to quickly go around the EM780 and check out all of the available ports and features of the PC. I'll start out at the top since we're already taking a peek at it. As I mentioned, the slick grille here is the intake vent for the active cooling here with the EM780. This does use liquid metal to help keep temperatures nice and cool for a unit this compact. Now coming to the front, we have the power indicator light, the power button, the 3.5mm headset port, and one of the USB Type-C 4.0 ports. On the left side of the intake, we have some typical certification markings, an additional vent, and the serial number. On the back of the unit, we have another vent, and you can actually see a bit of the heatsink peeking through. Below the vent, we have, starting at the right, the second USB Type-C 4.0 port, two USB 3.2 Gen 2 ports, and finally the HDMI 2.1 video out. And on the right of the EM780, we have another vent, the reset button, an additional USB 3.2 Gen 2 port, a micro SD slot for storage expansion, which is nice to have a convenient way to add additional storage, and a standard Kensington lock. At the bottom of the EM780, we have lots of openings to let the air move through the entirety of the unit, which is critical for a PC of this size. So let's get some measurements and size up the EM780. I wanted to have a little fun here, but also show how small this PC really is compared to some more common items. First, let's get the hard numbers on the EM780, which has a width and length of 80mm or just a little over 3 inches, and a height of 43mm, which is just a little over 1.5 inches. First up, a standard USB wired mouse, which is pretty remarkable to see given that one of the essential accessories to a PC is almost the same size as said PC. Here is an Xbox Series controller which resembles my channel's colors compared to the EM780, which makes the Xbox controller seem massive in comparison. Then an original Game Boy, and it's just incredible to see how much power we have in this tiny PC compared to the Game Boy, which is essentially double the size. A GPD Win Mini with the same 7840U processor that the EM780 has. It's the most compact 7840U handheld against the most compact 7840U mini PC. A delicious 4-piece chicken McNuggets from McDonald's, and these are very close in size. And finally, an apple. No, not that kind of apple, but the tasty fruit that makes for a delicious snack. With the fun comparisons out of the way, let's actually disassemble a bit of the EM780. I usually like doing teardowns as a way to explore ease of access to standard replaceable components such as the internal drive, RAM, and normally in the case of handhelds, the battery. Sounds simple enough here. At the bottom of the EM780, we have 4 Phillips screws hiding underneath the rubber feet. Just gently peel these back to gain access to the screws. Let's quickly get these feet all off so we can then unscrew from the bottom of the unit. I'm going to go ahead and grab a Phillips size 000 bit from my trusty iFixit kit to get this going. Okay, quickly removing all 4 screws, and I just want to show one of these screws in the palm of my hands, which obviously cover a majority of the height of the EM780, so it is quite secure to the unit. Giving it a little wiggle and the bottom plate will pop right off. Just be careful, there is a fan at the bottom plate that is connected to the main board. So a lot of interesting things here to make note of. First of all, almost the entirety of the bottom plate is a massive heatsink. We also have a thermal pad down to help dissipate the heat from the included SSD drive to the heatsink as well as fan here. The bottom piece is very solid. As I mentioned, my unit includes a 1TB 2230 SSD, and this is a Kingston branded one, which is nice to see. The other key thing to make note of here is that replacing the drive is a very simple process with easy access to the drive. Additionally, there are no warranty stickers, so we are not voiding anything by potentially doing a replacement. Okay, going back to the EM780, I did want to show a little bit of the top side. The top plate is actually clipped into place with some retention tabs. If you use something like a guitar pick, you should be able to get something in between the body and the top plate to help separate it from the main body. So doing that, I was easily able to pop off the top plate. There is nothing connected to this top plate. We now have a look at the fairly substantial fan at the top. Let me go ahead and peel back this protective film to reveal the actual fan assembly. As you can see, this essentially covers the entirety of the EM780. The fan assembly does appear to be held into place with just 3 Phillips screws. I will use the same bit to get these removed. So quickly getting these 3 screws removed, and the fan comes out nice and easy. Of course, make sure to disconnect the cable before removing from the body. We now have a look at the heatsink over the 7840U. Now, as I mentioned before, the EM780 uses liquid metal, and so I will not go beyond this point for my disassembly. The RAM on the EM780 is soldered onto the board, and so it is not user replaceable. This doesn't surprise me all that much given the very small size we are working with here. As of right now, I believe the EM780 is only offered with 32GB of RAM, so the memory decision becomes pretty straightforward. Now looking around here, I can tell the EM780 does use a stacked motherboard. Given the limited space, this is something else that is expected. Let's turn on the EM780 for the first time and take a peek at what ships with it out of the box. As usual, we have the initial Windows setup process, but once we finally make it to the desktop, we do have a very clean install of Windows here, and as always, the usual Microsoft preloaded software, but Minisforum does not have any additional software of their own loaded here. Now, one thing I always like to do with these desktop PCs is check out the BIOS and the options that we have available to us. I really like the setup that Minisforum has here. It's very clean and easy to navigate. As we can see, we have the Ryzen 7 7840U with the 780M graphics and 32GB of RAM at 6400 MHz. Let's navigate into the advanced section, and I'm already pleased that Minisforum has this option available to us. So many manufacturers choose to lock a lot of options out of their BIOS, which is definitely a shame. Some of these options are pretty standard, like the trusted computing, power configuration, hardware monitor, and CPU configuration. Now, of particular interest, especially because we have an AMD APU, is the AMD CBS section. Within here, we can make some interesting changes. The MBIO common options allows us to tweak the graphics configuration and make changes such as adjusting the UMA frame buffer size. This is set to 2GB by default, but given we have 32GB of RAM on this system, it can definitely be adjusted higher. Now for the purpose of this video, I will be leaving it at default settings. Let's back out and explore the SMU common options, which will have additional points of interest. In here we can make quite a few adjustments, including adjusting TDP, sustained power limits, package power tracking, thermal thresholds, and smart shift settings. Beyond this, we have our usual BIOS features such as security and boot options. So with that quick overview of the BIOS out of the way, let's now talk about some synthetic benchmarks with the EM780. For this video, I decided to leave all options alone and benchmark performance straight out of the box, as most users will most likely not make any adjustments or even want to. This will be a nice change of pace for me, as I am used to benchmarking the 7840U in a handheld device with TDP considerations. So let's first get the Geekbench 6 score for the EM780, which came in at 9,812 for the multi-core score and 2,031 for the single-core score. And of course the 3DMark Time Spy score, which came in at 7,871 for the CPU score, 2,667 for the graphics score, and an overall Time Spy score of 2,960. These numbers definitely put the EM780 in line with similar 7840U devices. Now let's take a look at some in-game benchmarks, and for this I charted the average frame rate across various graphic settings. So let's start first with Shadow of the Tomb Raider. At 1080p using the DirectX 12 mode, we can see how the performance scales going from the highest preset, which averaged 32 frames per second, all the way to the lowest preset, hitting an average of 61 frames per second. This definitely demonstrates a good range of options that can be adjusted based on preference. Next, we have the Forza Horizon 5 in-game benchmark, and this is another very solid performer on the EM780, with the Ultra settings at 1080p averaging 39 frames per second, and hitting 87 frames per second, going down to that very low preset. Much like Shadow of the Tomb Raider, we have plenty of room to scale here. Finally, our last in-game benchmark with Cyberpunk 2077, and this will easily be the most demanding of the three. Starting with the Ultra preset at 1080p, the game averaged 25.65 frames per second. Impressively, even at the high settings at 1080p, Cyberpunk was able to hit an average of 30.35, which means one could potentially lock Cyberpunk to 30 frames per second using high settings at 1080p. And using the lowest setting at 1080p, Cyberpunk managed 61 frames per second for its in-game benchmark. I definitely think these numbers are very solid overall, especially given what we are working with here. So with the synthetic and in-game benchmarks out of the way, let's now explore how the EM780 performs across various PC games. For this section, I have a varied selection of titles, including some newer releases as well as popular titles. Let's start out with what I consider the least demanding out of the selection. Persona 3 Reload is a very new release coming out earlier in the month. Persona 3 Reload is a full remake of the original Persona 3 with updated visuals, gameplay, and an art style that resembles Persona 5 in many ways. I wasn't too surprised by the performance here with Persona 3 Reload, but at a 1920 by 1080 resolution with a 60 frames per second target using the middle settings, the game was very solid and consistent. I did test Reload using the high settings, but I felt that the middle settings gave the most stable experience when targeting 60 frames per second, but it was very close at high settings as well. Doom Eternal is definitely no stranger to the channel, and it's always a game that I love to showcase for various reasons. The id engine in Doom Eternal scales so well that I find it to be a great way to test all sorts of devices, and the fast and frantic gameplay is always fun to see on screen. For Doom Eternal, I am set to use 1920 by 1080 again, with a dynamic resolution target of 60 frames per second, and at high settings this game is just buttery smooth, and performance is having no issue keeping up with the fast-paced gameplay of Doom Eternal with these settings. It's been a while since I've featured Spiderman Remastered for a PC showcase, but it's always fun checking out the Sony ports on PC, and Spiderman Remastered is well worth a revisit. It's another game that has plenty of options to adjust. We are yet again set to a resolution of 1920 by 1080, with AMD FSR 2.1 set to use a dynamic resolution scaling target of 30 frames per second and medium graphic settings. The game does actually work pretty well with a 60 frames per second dynamic resolution scaling, but I just found it to be a bit more stable at that 30 frames per second setting, and really it's just a matter of preference, but we do have plenty of room to adjust here. Starfield is surprisingly a game that I've yet to feature on the channel, and so with this video we're gonna change that. Starfield is a fairly new release coming out last year in September, only for the Xbox consoles and PC. I'm particularly excited to feature this game since it does have AMD FSR 3 support, and I was very curious to see how it would fare with the 7840U. So with Starfield I tried out a few different combinations, ultimately settling on a resolution of 1920 by 1080 using low settings with AMD's FSR 3 and frame generation turned on. The performance was pretty solid overall with a target of 60 frames per second, but it is of course variable depending on the environment. It does range anywhere from the 50s all the way up to the 90s with these settings. We do have room for adjustment, but I much prefer this game at 60 frames per second over 30 frames per second target, and ultimately I came away very impressed with the results. Finally, for our last game being featured here, and one that I've been showcasing a bit, is Alan Wake 2, which is an even newer release than Starfield, coming out back at the end of October. This is probably the most demanding game out of these games, but since we are essentially not worried about battery life, the EM780 will be pushing the power and capabilities of that 7840U. Alan Wake 2 is set to use a resolution of 1920 by 1080 with AMD FSR set to performance, a 30 frames per second target, using low settings. The game is definitely pushing the capabilities here, but we are able to stay locked at that 30 frames per second target with some occasional dips in frame rate.
Better detective than I am. You've cracked cases that had the rest of us baffled.
It's now that time to explore some emulation with the EM780 and get a nice feel for how it handles the higher end of emulation. We're going to start with the Nintendo side and some Gamecube with a Dolphin emulator, and there's no better way than to really flex some of the EM780's muscle with a bit of F-Zero GX. My target for Gamecube emulation was attempting to hit 4K resolution, and here with F-Zero GX, I am set to use 6 times the native resolution of Gamecube, which is equivalent to a 4K resolution, and it's very smooth. Even at points where the track is populated with many racers, the EM780 is barely breaking a sweat. It's just awesome seeing F-Zero at this high of a resolution, and it looks so beautiful in motion. And one of my personal favorite Mario games, Super Mario Sunshine, is always such a delight to play. In particular, this game is a great one to show off with upscaling as the graphics really clean up nicely and look super sharp and vibrant. Just like F-Zero, I am set to use that 6 times native upscaling, which results in a 4K resolution. I think the EM780 is a great option if you're looking for a very tiny PC to put you in your living room, on your TV stand to get a lot of the Gamecube library running at 4K resolution to make use of a modern TV. So let's take it one step further and check out another platform running with a Dolphin emulator. The Nintendo Wii does have a few really awesome exclusives that I really enjoy playing on Dolphin. First up, I always like checking out the remake of Klonoa, which was a Wii exclusive for a good amount of time, but is now available as part of the Klonoa Fantasy Reverie collection. Much like Gamecube, I wanted to see if we could handle some 4K resolution with the Wii as well. For Klonoa, I am set to use that 6 times native resolution, and this one really isn't having much issue staying locked to its target frame rate at that setting. Super Mario Galaxy 2 is another great Wii game that is still exclusive to the platform. It also happens to be up there for me in terms of my favorite games overall. It's a bit more demanding, and for this one I did have to turn the upscaling down to use 5 times native resolution, which is still very impressive and looks absolutely beautiful for this game. The performance was still quite good even with the 6 times option, but I felt that performance was still smoother overall using the 5x setting, and so that is what I went with for this footage. Now let's head over one more generation and check out some Wii U emulation with the Cemu emulator, and it is always something I enjoy exploring on x86 devices. I'll start out with a lighter Wii U game. Nano Assault Neo was a fantastic game that was released on the eShop, and it comes to us from Shinin, who is also responsible for other awesome eShop games like Fast Racing. Nano Assault Neo is a fun playthrough, especially for fans of twin-stick shooter games. There is a PS4 port available, and the first game in the series was a 3DS exclusive. I have Nano Assault Neo running here at the Wii U's native resolution, and it's running incredibly smooth, just sipping on the power available with the EM780. And now for a bit more demanding Wii U game, Xenoblade Chronicles X is still exclusive to the platform, and so for fans of the Xenoblade Chronicles series, it's one well worth checking out, and with Cemu the ability to do so is expanded. For Xenoblade, I am using the native Wii U resolution, and it's another game that is doing a very solid job staying locked to its native 30 frames per second target. Cemu is an emulator that does quite a bit of shader compilation, and definitely with the heavier games you will want to play through it a bit to smooth things out. However, despite that, Chronicles X remained quite smooth throughout. And finally, for one last Nintendo platform, let's check out some Switch emulation with the Yuzu emulator. I'll start out with one that has been a consistent game to showcase on the channel. Cruisin' Blast makes a return again, partly because I just love this fun and fast racing game, but also because it's an awesome visual experience and a Nintendo Switch exclusive. For this one, I wanted to push to EM780 a little bit, and I do have Cruisin' Blast set to use 2 times the native resolution of the Switch, running in docked mode, which is equivalent to a 4K resolution. Essentially, this means that Cruisin' Blast is running better here on the EM780 than on native Switch hardware. And for Fire Emblem fans, I had to feature Fire Emblem Engage, which much like Cruisin' Blast is a personal favorite of mine. But not only that, it's another game that I explore the possibilities of some upscaling. I have Engage set to use 2 times native resolution in docked mode, which means like Cruisin' Blast, we have more 4K goodness on the EM780, and another example of a game that runs better here than on an original hardware. It's a real treat to see a lot of these games making use of upscaling, which just lets the awesome visuals for a lot of these games come through. Finally, for a heavier title, I have The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Now this is a game that will require a lot of shader compilation, and so it's one that needs a bit of time playing through, and then things will potentially smooth out quite a bit. Because this is a bit more demanding for the footage, I am set to use the Switch's native resolution in docked mode, and honestly this is running better than expected, especially given the size of the EM780, and the very strong performance of the Ryzen 7840U is once again coming through here. I did explore upscaling with this one, and I do think that there's just enough power here to potentially go up a little bit to enjoy better visuals. It's now finally time to check out some Xbox emulation, and we will start out with original Xbox using the XEMU emulator. Let's start out with a game that I haven't talked about in a little bit. Rally Sport Challenge 2 is a fantastic rally game from back in the day. In fact, both games are well worth checking out if you enjoy rally racing. This game was developed by Digital Illusion CE, better known as DICE, the same studio responsible nowadays for games like Battlefield. Rally Sport Challenge 2 is an original Xbox exclusive and really does hold up very well today. I have the game running here at 2 times native resolution, and to me, the visuals still look awesome with equally great gameplay. Now for another visually impressive game, Dead or Alive 3 is another original Xbox exclusive which is playable with the Xbox backwards compatibility program. The fast-paced fighting game from Team Ninja is still a treat to play through, and outside of this release, we don't have any other way to enjoy it on PC, but thanks to XEMU, Dead or Alive fans can check this one out. Like Rally Sport Challenge 2, I have Dead or Alive 3 set to run at 2 times native resolution, and the game is performing very well here with the EM780. Now let's check out some Xbox 360 emulation with Xenia Canary. I'll start out with a game that I personally love and have played through on both PC and Xbox. The original Torchlight is an action hack-and-slash RPG much in the same style as Diablo. Now I did mention that I played through Torchlight on PC, but I do like this Xbox 360 version since it has controller support, and therefore with Xenia Canary is a nice option for those wanting to play Torchlight on PC but with native controller support. Torchlight is well worth checking out, and there are quite a few sequels nowadays, but the original still holds a special place for me. The game is doing quite well with Xenia Canary running at native resolution, and just has occasional hiccups here and there. And channel regulars know just how much I adore the Forza Horizon series, and the original game got its start on the Xbox 360, and so it's always one I enjoy checking out with Xenia Canary. Forza Horizon is another game that runs quite well with Xenia Canary, and I do have the game here running at native resolution, and much like Torchlight has occasional hiccups here and there, but overall is a solid experience that still looks awesome to this day. So let's now check out the Sony side and start out with some PlayStation Portable emulation, first using the PPSSPP emulator. Now, one of my absolute favorite racing games available for the platform is Ridge Racer, and it's always a fun one to showcase and talk about. For this video, I wanted to get as close as possible to a 4K resolution target. With Ridge Racer, I do have PPSSPP set to use the Vulkan backend with an 8x native resolution upscale, which is the 4K resolution setting. With these settings, the game is running very smooth without any issues. It's an absolute joy seeing Ridge Racer at these settings, and another great potential use case here with the EM780 running a good portion of the PSP library at 4K resolution. For a little bit heavier PSP game to test, God of War Chains of Olympus is always a good one to test for this purpose. For this one, I did have to go down to 7x native resolution, which gets us close to that 4K target, and at that setting with Vulkan, the game is doing very well staying locked to that 60 frames per second target. Now it's time for some Sony home consoles, and we will start out first with PlayStation 2 using the PCSX2 emulator. I'll start out with a lighter PS2 game to emulate. Contra's Shattered Soldier is an awesome entry in the Contra series that returns to the classic 2D gameplay style from the older games. Shattered Soldier is a must-play for Contra fans. For this game, I wanted to test the limits and try to push that 4K resolution. For this game, I am set to use a 6x native resolution upscale, which is the equivalent of 4K, and the game is doing very well here. Now for a more demanding game, God of War 2 returns to the channel again as a great showcase for the upper limit of PS2 emulation. Now I did try to run this one at 4K, but unfortunately it was a bit too demanding. Instead, I have God of War 2 running at 4x native resolution, which is 1440p or 2K resolution, and the game still looks absolutely gorgeous here. I think this does represent a good range of what to expect with PlayStation 2 emulation, with the harder to emulate games doing well at this 4x native upscaling, with lighter games getting away with the 6x native upscaling. And finally, for our last console to showcase for emulation, PlayStation 3 with RPCS3 is always fun to explore, and despite the re-releases and remasters of a lot of PlayStation 3 games, there are still a few that remain exclusive to the platform. Let's start out with a beloved PlayStation franchise, Ratchet & Clank, and since there were quite a few releases in the Ratchet & Clank franchise, I wanted to feature one less talked about. Quest for Booty is the 6th installment in the Ratchet & Clank series and is smaller in scale than the others, but still a fun and quick playthrough for Ratchet & Clank fans. I have this game set to use 1080p resolution, and it does run very well here. Now for another awesome exclusive game, MotorStorm Pacific Rift is one of 3 MotorStorm games released on PlayStation 3, and all of them are exclusive to the platform, with the franchise unfortunately being forgotten today, and we haven't seen a new release in a long time. Thankfully, we can enjoy the MotorStorm games here with RPCS3, and performance really has improved over the years with this game. I have Pacific Rift set to use an upscale to 1080p, and it's having no issues staying locked to its native 30 frames per second target, and it does run really well here on the EM780. Finally, one of the most difficult games to run with RPCS3, God of War 3 returns again to the channel, and as always, I am making use of the game patches to remove a lot of the special effects in order to favor performance. However, I am very pleased with what I'm seeing here on the EM780, and the 7840U is flexing a bit of its power running the game at the PlayStation 3's native resolution with a 30 frames per second target, and it is running quite well even with shader compilation taking place. The game still manages to hold on to its 30 frames per second target that I've set. So with all of this gaming, how does a compact unit like the EM780 manage with its temperatures, as well as how loud does the fan get when under heavier loads? I was playing Spiderman Remastered for about an hour when I recorded these numbers, and it's definitely a game pushing the EM780 pretty hard. I was very impressed with temperatures, and while surface temperatures are not as critical given that this is a desktop unit and not a handheld, I still wanted to record the surface temperatures that we are seeing here. At the top of the unit, we have the coolest temperatures mostly staying in the low 30 degrees Celsius range. At the sides of the unit, we move up a little bit in temperature-wise, going into the high 30s and low 40s, and at the back we have the hottest temperatures with lots of warm air output, which is a good thing to see as airflow is present and moving the warm air away from the unit. Finally, at the bottom of the unit, we do have the massive heatsink here that covers essentially the entire bottom portion, so warmer temperatures are to be expected here. At the bottom, we have temperatures in the high 40s and low 50s, which again given this size is still quite solid here. Finally, I wanted to check the decibel levels for the fan under a heavy load, and numbers were around the high 40s here. Personally, while gaming, I didn't even notice a fan at all, and I think it's only really audible when the room is very quiet, which given the compact size is quite good. So we've now reached the end of this video, and I have to say that I am very impressed with the Minisforum EM780. It's already an impressive accomplishment from the moment you hold it in your hands, given its small size. However, despite its tiny footprint, it's clear that we're not losing out on power, and the Ryzen 7840U in this EM780 is still very much up to the task, and for many will perform very well, handling basic tasks like web browsing and productivity. But the best part about the EM780 is the gaming potential and capabilities here, and it really does show why the 7840U is still a great option today. Now I guess the only question that remains is who is it for? And obviously I think it's suitable for anyone looking for an incredibly compact desktop replacement. It's definitely a great option for those very limited on space, or perhaps want something compact that they can travel with them easily. Now in terms of price, I do think the EM780 is quite competitive with similar 7840U devices, and really comes down to the need for a device with an impressively small footprint. Regardless, I do believe the EM780 is a solid option if it meets your needs or requirements. I hope you enjoyed exploring the EM780 with me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. As always, I am the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.